I still remember that night like it was etched into my skull, every detail sharp and jagged. The kids had finally gone to sleep, which was like a small miracle on its own. 5-year-old Emma had been crying for what felt like hours about some dream she couldn't even explain, and little Max had just discovered the joy of screaming at 2 a.m. because the dog wouldn't let him use his blanket as a cape. By the time the house settled into the quiet hum of our neighborhood, I felt exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. I was drained in the kind of bone-deep way that makes you question everything about your life, about your choices. I wanted nothing more than to pour a glass of wine and sink into the couch. But there was this nagging tension in my chest that I couldn't shake, a feeling that tonight something would break, even if I didn't know what. I had noticed him being distant for a few weeks, subtle things at first, the kind of small signs you try to ignore because your heart refuses to believe the truth. Late nights at work that were mandatory, disappearing into the garage for hours with his phone, and this way he started smiling at it, that secretive little grin that made my skin crawl. He was texting more than usual, and I had a gut feeling about it. But I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to be that woman checking her husband's phone like a high schooler. I told myself I trusted him. I needed to trust him. But tonight, when the kids were asleep and the quiet pressed against every corner of our house, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The house was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the hallway nightlight. I told myself I was just going to check, a casual glance, nothing invasive. But as soon as I unlocked his phone, my stomach dropped like I had fallen into an endless pit. There it was, a chain of messages with her. His ex, my husband's ex-girlfriend from years before we met. She was married now, or at least that's what I thought I remembered from Facebook stalking the occasional wedding picture years ago. I didn't know why he was talking to her, why he would reach out now, but the moment I read the first text, everything in me froze. It started casual, almost innocent, which made it worse. "Hey, remember that night in Vegas? And I was thinking about you today." And then it got worse, way worse. He was confessing things to her, things he never said to me, things about missing her, about the way she made him feel alive, the way he couldn't stop thinking about her. He even sent her pictures from our last vacation, pictures of me, the kids, our house. He was sharing pieces of our life with her, like I wasn't even supposed to exist in the equation. I felt my chest tighten so much I thought I would pass out. My hands shook so badly I had to put the phone down on the kitchen counter, and I stood there for a long time just listening to the silence of our house. I kept thinking, how long has this been going on? The text timestamps were recent, hours old, minutes old even. The conversation was alive, ongoing, like it had been carefully hidden while I was tucking the kids in and humming lullabies. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to storm into the bedroom and throw the phone across the room and demand answers that I wasn't even sure I wanted. The betrayal hit me physically. It wasn't just emotional. It was like someone had grabbed my heart and squeezed it until it throbbed in protest. And the worst part was the cold understanding that he didn't even seem guilty. There were no apologies, no hesitations, just that familiar, casual arrogance I had once found charming, now grotesque. I remember sitting on the edge of the kitchen table, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles went white. I read the texts over and over again, trying to find some mistake, some hint that it wasn't what it looked like. But the messages were explicit in their longing, their nostalgia, their secret intimacy. They laughed about things I didn't know they shared, inside jokes he never shared with me, and I realized then that I had been living with a stranger, someone who smiled at me every morning, but carried a hidden life with him that I couldn't touch. I didn't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, until I heard the soft creak of our bedroom door. He came out looking tired, his hair mussed like he had just rolled out of bed, yawning, completely unaware that I had discovered the entire truth. My heart wanted to explode. I wanted to fling the phone at him, to scream, to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt. But instead, I felt this cold, heavy weight in my chest.
a mix of anger and sorrow that was so intense I couldn't even speak. He asked me what I was doing, his voice soft and sleepy, and I had to pretend, just for a moment, that everything was normal. Just checking the kitchen, I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. My stomach nodded as he nodded and shuffled back to bed, completely oblivious. That was the moment I realized I had been living a lie for years, and I didn't even know the half of it yet. I sat there in the dark, the phone clutched to my chest, feeling like the entire world had shifted, and I didn't know where the ground was anymore. The betrayal wasn't just about the texts, it was about the casualness of it, the way he could compartmentalize us, our kids, our home, and still nurture this hidden desire for someone else. The next few days were a blur. I went through our routines like a zombie. I pretended to laugh at the kids' jokes, pretended to enjoy the little mundane moments of our suburban life, breakfast at the kitchen table, trips to the grocery store, bedtime stories. But every time I saw him, every time he smiled or leaned into me, I felt a surge of rage and confusion. I wanted to confront him, to make him pay, but I also wanted to disappear, to run away from the life we had built together. And I hated myself for that, because I knew the kids needed stability, even if the person I was married to didn't. I started noticing little things I hadn't before. The way he would glance at his phone when I entered the room, the way he would laugh at texts and hide his screen quickly, the casual way he would say work stuff when clearly it wasn't. I wanted to ask him about it, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck. I was afraid of the truth, afraid of the explosion that would come when I finally confronted him, afraid of what this would do to our kids if everything fell apart. But the longer I waited, the heavier it became. The more it felt like a storm building in the center of my chest that I couldn't escape. One night, a few days after I discovered the texts, I couldn't sleep again. Emma was tucked in next to me because she had a nightmare about monsters under the bed, and Max was asleep in his crib, breathing softly. I sat on the couch with the phone, scrolling through the conversation, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself it could somehow be harmless. But there was no plausible explanation. And then I found something worse. He had planned to meet her. Not just flirt online, not just reminisce. He had arranged to see her, somewhere public, but still a secret from me. My hands started shaking, tears blurring my vision, and I felt like I might actually be sick.
The thought of him seeing her, laughing with her, holding her hand, while I tucked our kids into bed, made my stomach twist in ways I didn't think were humanly possible. I sat there for hours, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to call him out immediately, to demand every truth, to rip the secrecy out of our lives and face the chaos head-on. But another part of me, a part I barely recognized, wanted to wait, to gather proof, to understand why. Why now, after all these years? Why with her? Why betray everything we had built together? The questions looped in my head like a broken record, each one sharper, each one heavier than the last. I knew I had to act, but I didn't know how. Part of me considered leaving, packing up and taking the kids somewhere safe, somewhere far from the man I thought I knew. But I also knew that if I left without confronting him, without making him see the wreckage he had created, I would regret it for the rest of my life. And so, I waited. I watched. I gathered, piece by piece, every message, every detail, every timestamp. I became a detective in my own home, quietly cataloging the betrayal while pretending everything was normal. And all the while, I hated myself for loving him, for feeling this mix of anger and longing, for hoping, absurdly, that maybe he would explain and it would all make sense. It's a strange, lonely kind of pain to realize that someone you've loved with your entire heart, someone who kissed you good morning and tucked the kids in at night, could harbor a secret life so vivid and unashamed. I kept replaying the early days, trying to remember when the first cracks might have appeared, trying to reconcile the husband I knew with the man in those messages. I kept asking myself if I missed signs, if I had been blind or foolish, and the answers didn't make it hurt any less. If anything, they made the ache sharper, the feeling of being deceived so complete that it infiltrated every corner of my existence. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale, unforgiving light through the blinds, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to explode tonight. I wasn't going to scream or throw plates or confront him in the raw, chaotic way my heart demanded. I was going to wait for him to slip again, to make a mistake, to give me the clarity I needed. And I knew, deep down, that the moment I confronted him, nothing would ever be the same again. I would either have to rebuild a life from the rubble of betrayal or walk away completely. Either way, I had crossed a line from which there was no return. And yet, even as I sat there, gripping the phone, even as my heart hammered with rage and fear, I felt an absurd flicker of hope. Hope that he would explain, that he would apologize, that somehow, some way, the man I thought I loved would come back to me. It was a hopeless, irrational hope, but it was there. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all, the knowledge that I could hate him, despise him, and still want him to stay. I didn't know it then, but that night, the night the house was silent and the kids were asleep, marked the beginning of the end. It was the night I discovered that the man I married, the man I trusted with my life and my heart, could betray everything without a second thought. And I also realized, painfully, that from that night on, nothing in my life would ever feel safe again. Not our home, not our marriage, not even my own sense of self. After that night, everything shifted in the quietest, most insidious way. He didn't apologize, not immediately. He didn't confess, didn't stumble over words trying to explain. Instead, he acted like nothing had happened, smiling at the kids, making his usual breakfast, scrolling through his phone in front of me while pretending it was all work-related. The audacity of it made my skin crawl. I wanted to confront him, to tear into him, but every time I opened my mouth, my voice caught in my throat. I became hyper-aware of the house, of the way the kids laughed, of the way he moved. Every mundane gesture felt loaded, suspicious. When he kissed me on the cheek in the morning, I flinched. When he hugged me after work, I felt like I was holding a stranger, someone who had learned to mimic my husband perfectly while hiding a parallel life I had no access to. I started tracking his behavior obsessively. I know it sounds insane, but it became a compulsion. I would follow him online, checking social media, tracing patterns, noting any subtle changes. I paid attention to his tone when he texted, to the little pauses, to the way he shifted when he realized I was looking. I caught him more than once trying to hide his screen or minimizing windows when I entered the room. I felt my mind turning into this anxious, suspicious machine, always on edge, always analyzing, always waiting. And the worst part was the guilt. I hated myself for it, hated that I couldn't just move on or trust him blindly. But I couldn't, not anymore. Then came the day when the first real confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. I was putting laundry away when I noticed his laptop open on the dining table and the screen lit up with a messaging app I didn't even know he used. I froze. My hands shook. I had promised myself I would wait for proof, that I would see the full picture before acting. But seeing those messages there, bright and undeniable, I felt rage and despair rise together in my chest. The messages were from her, short, teasing, intimate. Nothing explicit physically, but the emotional infidelity was staggering. He was planning, laughing, reminiscing, every text dripping with nostalgia and longing for something I had thought we left behind years ago. I wanted to throw the laptop, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I sat down, my chest tight, my brain spinning. I read every message carefully, cataloging every line, memorizing every word. He was talking to her about meeting for lunch, about remembering that one bar we used to go to, about how he felt alive when they were together. I felt like I was seeing the truth of my marriage for the first time, and it was unbearable. The quiet realization that he had been nurturing this connection all along, while I was home, while the kids slept, while I trusted him, made me feel hollow inside. I started noticing little cracks in our daily life that I had previously ignored. The way he would disappear into the garage for hours, saying he was fixing the car or organizing tools. The way he always seemed to have a sudden meeting when I asked him to take a break and help with something at home. Even our intimacy changed. He became distracted, distant, almost rehearsed in his affection. And I knew why. He was pouring himself into someone else emotionally, while I was still here, holding our home together like some invisible stage set for his secret life. One evening, I caught him texting again. I was sitting on the couch pretending to read, but really I was waiting, watching. He thought I didn't notice,
fingers flying across the screen, eyes flicking up to make sure I wasn't looking. And then I saw it. The little heart emoji he sent, the joke they shared that made him laugh out loud, the way he typed words with a tenderness reserved for no one in our family. I wanted to smash the phone, but I didn't. Instead, I kept watching, my stomach in knots, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything. But I waited. I had to know everything.
Days turned into a week, and the tension in our house became unbearable. I could feel it in every room, in the way the kids played quietly in the corner, in the way he avoided eye contact with me, in the way I flinched at every word he spoke. I started staying up late at night, watching him sleep next to me, listening to the soft rise and fall of his chest, the quiet hum of the fan in the bedroom. I hated myself for feeling this twisted mix of longing and betrayal, for missing him even as I despised him. But the more I watched, the more I realized that I couldn't escape it. He had become this dual person, the man I married and the man he was with her, and I was trapped in the middle, a silent observer of my own life unraveling. Then came the day he made a mistake. I was in the kitchen making lunch for the kids when his phone lit up on the counter, buzzing with a notification. Without thinking, I grabbed it, and there it was, a message to her, meant to be private, full of longing, full of plans, full of a love I wasn't a part of. He had arranged to meet her at a cafe downtown the following week. My chest tightened. I could feel the betrayal physically, a sharp, stabbing ache that made my vision blur. I didn't know whether to confront him immediately or keep collecting evidence, but I knew that I couldn't unsee what I had seen. My marriage, my life, the life we had built with the kids, was teetering on the edge, and I was the only one who knew it. The days that followed were excruciating. I pretended everything was normal, smiling at him, laughing at the kids, acting like the house was filled with the same warmth it had always had. But inside, I was calculating, planning, waiting. I needed proof. I needed clarity. I needed him to show me who he really was without the mask. And the more I watched, the more obvious it became. He was addicted to the thrill of this secret life. The casual way he divided his affection, the intensity he reserved for her, the way he could lie and smile at the same time. It was like living with a stranger, someone who had learned to mimic my husband perfectly, but was slowly erasing him in the process. One night, I followed him. I know it sounds extreme, but I had to see for myself. I told myself it was for clarity, for proof, for my own sanity. He drove downtown, parked in a quiet side street, and went into a little cafe. I waited in the car, heart pounding, watching through the windshield as he sat across from her. They laughed, leaned close, touched hands, small, intimate gestures that made my stomach churn. I felt dizzy, nauseous, furious, heartbroken. It was undeniable. The man I had trusted with everything was actively living a life with someone else, and I had been blind until this moment. I didn't confront him that night. I drove home in silence, shaking, trying to hold back tears, trying to hold back the scream that wanted to tear through my chest. I tucked the kids into bed, kissed them goodnight, and sat on the couch long after they were asleep, staring at the wall, trying to process the magnitude of what I had seen. I hated myself for feeling love for him in that moment, for feeling rage and longing at the same time, but I couldn't escape it. He had carved out a piece of my life for someone else, and now I had to decide what to do with the wreckage. The following days were a nightmare of subtle warfare. I confronted him, finally, in a quiet moment when the kids were at school. I held the phone up, laid out the evidence, and waited for him to respond. And he did. He didn't deny anything. He didn't flinch. Instead, he admitted it with this casual, almost disarming honesty. He told me he still loved me, he still cared for the kids, but he couldn't help the way he felt about her. That casual admission hit me harder than the deception ever could. The betrayal wasn't just the texts or the meetings. It was the fact that he thought I could understand, that I could forgive, that I could compartmentalize this like he did. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him feel the chaos he had inflicted on my heart. But I stayed silent. I listened, numb, processing the fact that the man I married had quietly chosen to love someone else, while I existed in this marriage as a placeholder, a caretaker, a witness. I started sleeping in the guest room.
I started building a mental fortress around myself, a way to survive the days, the mornings, the routines, without letting him see the full extent of my devastation. Every small interaction was a test, every glance a negotiation, every word a battlefield. And all the while, I carried the weight of knowing that my life, my marriage, my family had been permanently altered. Nothing would ever be the same again, and I had no choice but to navigate this new reality, one painful step at a time. I began noticing his subtle attempts to make things normal again, little gestures that felt hollow to me now. Breakfast in bed, helping with the kids, compliments that rang empty in my ears. He wanted to maintain the illusion that nothing had changed, that we could somehow continue, that life could go on as if the betrayal had been a mistake rather than an ongoing pattern. And I realized that no matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I wanted to preserve our family, I couldn't ignore the fact that he had fundamentally shifted the balance of our lives. Trust was broken, the foundation was cracked, and the house we built on it could never feel stable again. I found myself daydreaming about confronting her, about calling her, demanding she stop, demanding she acknowledge the havoc she had helped create. But I didn't. I didn't because I knew it would be meaningless. The damage wasn't hers alone, it was his, and he had made the choice. And the most terrifying part was realizing that even if I left, even if I walked away, he might still choose her over me. That knowledge, that fear, wrapped around me like a noose, tightening with every breath. I was stuck in a limbo of love, rage, betrayal, and helplessness, forced to navigate a life that no longer resembled what I thought was mine. I spent hours in that guest room, thinking about our past, our vows, the little moments that had once made life feel safe and sacred. I questioned every decision I had made, every sign I had ignored, every instinct I had married. And through it all, the worst realization was that he had never changed, had never stopped desiring her, had never paused to consider the consequences of his actions. He had made a choice, a conscious decision to maintain a dual life, and I was living in the aftermath, the silent witness to a betrayal so complete it left me questioning everything about myself, my marriage, and my life. The weeks that followed felt like being trapped underwater, constantly fighting for air but never reaching the surface. Every interaction with him was layered with tension, a minefield where one wrong word could set off an explosion I didn't know I could survive. He tried, subtly, quietly, to maintain normalcy, but I could see through it now. The smiles were practiced, the touches rehearsed, the casual conversation hollow. I felt like a ghost living in my own home, haunted by the man I married and the stranger he had become. And the kids, they were oblivious to the storm brewing around them, and I hated that I couldn't shield them completely from the chaos, even if I wanted to.
One night, I stayed up late again, sitting in the dark of the living room with the baby monitor in front of me, the faint hum of the city seeping through the blinds. I had the messages pulled up on my laptop, reading them over, trying to memorize every word, every subtle cue that revealed his heart wasn't mine entirely. I knew it was obsessive, I knew it was unhealthy, but I couldn't stop. I felt like if I let go, if I didn't study them, I would lose the last thread of clarity and a life that was unraveling faster than I could process. And as I scrolled, a sense of vertigo washed over me, the realization that I had been living in half-truths for years, blind to the small betrayals that added up, blind to the casual disregard he had been cultivating all along. He came into the living room quietly, like he didn't want to wake the kids, and I pretended to be reading something on my phone. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth, and for a moment I almost wanted to reach out, almost wanted to pretend that everything was fine. But then I remembered the hand he had held across the cafe table, the laughter he shared with her, and the flicker of hope in his eyes that wasn't meant for me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt this intense, almost physical wave of revulsion and longing collide inside me. I hated him for betraying me, but I also hated myself for wanting him to stay, for wishing that maybe, somehow, he could come back. "Do you want to talk?" he asked softly, his voice almost a whisper, careful, like he was stepping on glass. I laughed bitterly, a sound that startled both of us. "Talk about what? How you've been living a double life? How you've been planning to see her while pretending to be here with me?" My voice cracked, and suddenly all the carefully contained rage I had been holding back spilled into the room. He flinched, but didn't interrupt. He just sat there, looking at me with those eyes I had once found comforting,
now empty and calculating. It's not what you think, he began. And I almost laughed again because I had thought about this scenario for weeks, about the excuses, the lies, the rehearsed confessions, but nothing could ever justify the casual cruelty of it, the way he had made our life a stage for his secret desires. It's exactly what I think, I said, my voice low, shaking. I know about the lunches, the texts, the little smiles across the screen. I've seen it all. Every word, every plan, every moment you've devoted to her while I've been here trying to hold everything together. The words tasted like ash, bitter and heavy in my mouth. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment I thought I saw guilt, maybe even regret, flicker across his face, but it was fleeting. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quietly, almost pleadingly. I shook my head, feeling my chest tighten until it hurt. Don't tell me you didn't plan for it. Don't tell me this is some accident. You've been nurturing this. You've been hiding it, protecting it, making it a part of your life while I had no idea. This isn't some mistake. It's deliberate. He didn't argue. That was what made it worse. The silence between us was loaded, thick with years of trust crumbling into dust. I realized then that he had made a choice, and that choice was hers. Or at least it wasn't entirely mine anymore. And for the first time, I allowed myself to admit it out loud, that maybe, somehow, my marriage was over, even if we stayed under the same roof for appearances, for the kids, for the illusion of normalcy. The next morning, the air in our house felt different, tense, electric, fragile. I kept to myself, the kids noticing but not fully understanding. I avoided eye contact with him, and he gave me a look, half of apology, half of something I couldn't name. I started planning, subconsciously at first, what my next steps would be. I couldn't just wait and watch anymore. I had to reclaim some control, some sense of stability in a life that had been hijacked. I began documenting everything, every message, every suspicious absence, every lie. I wasn't sure if I would use it, but knowing that I had proof gave me a strange, cold comfort. And then came a day that shattered whatever fragile equilibrium I had been maintaining. I had gone to pick the kids up from school, juggling Emma's insistence on telling me every detail of her day and Max's tantrums over misplaced shoes when my phone buzzed. It was him. The message was short, casual, and devastating. We need to talk. Not here, not now. Just you and me. My stomach dropped. Panic, rage, heartbreak, they collided inside me until I couldn't breathe. I knew exactly what it meant. It meant that she was involved, meant that this wasn't just emotional cheating anymore, meant that he wanted to carve out a space for their connection away from me, away from the kids. I felt a wave of nausea, but also an insane, terrifying clarity. I needed to face this, finally, directly, before it spiraled further out of my control. That night, I waited until the kids were asleep and confronted him again. We sat in the living room, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the walls. My hands were trembling, but I held my phone up like a weapon. This, I said, voice steady now, though my chest burned. This ends tonight. You either tell me everything, or I'm done pretending I can survive this. I can't live in a house with a man who chooses someone else while my kids sleep in the next room. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was weighing his options, like he hadn't considered this moment fully. And then, almost casually, he confessed. He had been seeing her for months in secret. Not just texts or lunches, but full weekends, little trips, moments stolen from the life we shared. And yet he still claimed he loved me, still said he cared for our family. The cognitive dissonance of it was like a physical blow. How could someone harbor that kind of love for two people at the same time and still look me in the eye while our kids slept peacefully in the next room? I left the living room that night feeling hollow, a mix of fury and despair so intense it felt like it would swallow me whole. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the life I thought I had, the man I thought I knew, and the betrayal that had poisoned everything. Sleep came fitfully, broken by memories of the cafe, the laughter, the intimacy that wasn't mine, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of my kids who didn't yet understand the chaos their father had wrought. Over the next few weeks, I became a master of compartmentalization. I maintained the routines, the school runs, the bedtime rituals, the lunches, and the homework rows. I smiled at my husband, spoke casually about dinner plans, even laughed at jokes he didn't even try to hide from me. But underneath it all, I was calculating, planning, preparing myself emotionally for the confrontation that would inevitably define the rest of our lives. And with every casual touch he offered, every hollow smile he gave, I felt the weight of betrayal crush me further, leaving me simultaneously enraged, heartbroken, and strangely cold. I started imagining scenarios in my head. Leaving him, taking the kids, starting over somewhere far away. Confronting her publicly, making the world see what she had done.
Talking to him calmly, coldly, like a prosecutor laying out evidence. Every night I ran through these possibilities, trying to prepare myself, trying to find a way to reclaim the power that had been stripped from me. And through it all, the worst part was realizing how deeply I still loved him, even as I hated him, even as I acknowledged the fact that he had destroyed the foundation of everything I had built my life around. One evening, I found him staring at old photos of our family. He didn't realize I was watching from the hallway. I saw the fleeting sadness, the tiny crack of regret, but it was quickly replaced by that familiar, practiced smile. He looked at me then, and I realized something terrifying. He had no intention of stopping. He would continue to see her, continue to balance this double life, and we would remain in this limbo, bound by children and familiarity, trapped in a house where love had become a negotiation and trust was a memory. I felt rage like I hadn't known existed. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls down, to make him feel even a fraction of the betrayal, but I knew it wouldn't fix anything. I had to survive. I had to endure. For the kids, for myself, for the part of me that still remembered the life before the lies. And yet, every day became a lesson in restraint, in surviving with dignity, in navigating the uncharted territory of a marriage ruined from the inside. And then one day, out of nowhere, I realized I was tired, not just emotionally, but physically, spiritually. I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of waiting. I was tired of being the woman who carried the weight of someone else's secret while maintaining the facade of normalcy. I had to make a choice. I had to either confront this fully, tear down the illusion completely, and face the wreckage, or I had to leave, take my children, and start a life that might never feel whole again, but would at least be mine. And for the first time, I realized that waiting, watching, calculating, it wasn't helping. It was only prolonging the inevitable collapse of everything I thought I knew. The day I finally decided I couldn't wait any longer started like every other ordinary morning in our house, but nothing about it would stay ordinary. I woke up early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, the kids still asleep, and for the first time in weeks I felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. I had made a plan, vague but deliberate. I wasn't going to wait for him to slip or stumble or confess on his own. I would force the truth out. I would confront him, fully, and decide the future of our marriage in one terrifying, unflinching conversation. There was no sugarcoating, no pretending. I had spent too long in the shadows of his deception. It was time to step into the light, or destroy the illusion entirely. I waited until the kids were up, fed, and distracted with cartoons, their laughter echoing through the living room like a fragile soundtrack to the tension building inside me. I remember standing in the hallway, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would burst, watching him sip his coffee and scroll through his phone with the ease of a man who believed he had nothing to fear. I hated him in that moment. I loved him too, in that awful, twisted, hopeless way that makes you forgive the unforgivable. But mostly, I hated him for making me feel powerless, for making me doubt my own instincts, for stealing years of my life with his quiet betrayal. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp, like a knife sliding across glass. He looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes, and for a brief moment I thought he might try to charm his way out of it, but then he noticed the resolve in my face, the weight behind my words, and his posture stiffened. He put down the phone, slowly, deliberately, like he was bracing for a storm. We went into the living room, and I sat across from him on the couch, clutching my phone like armor. I pulled up the conversation, every text, every message, every plan, laid out in stark, undeniable clarity. "I've seen everything," I said, my voice low, steady, controlled. "All of it. Every time you smiled at your phone, every time you hid it from me, every time you thought I wouldn't notice. I know about her. I know about the lunches, the meetings, the plans. I know about the weekends. Do you understand? I know everything." He looked down at the floor, a long pause stretching between us, heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't want it to get this far." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Didn't want it to get this far. That's your excuse.
You made it this far. You built it this far. And you think your regret, whispered in the quiet of this living room, will fix anything? My chest ached, my hands shook, but I kept my voice calm. Calm was the only thing I had left that he couldn't touch. I love you. I still love you, he said, voice cracking slightly. And for a second, I wanted to believe him, that tiny, impossible hope flaring in the pit of my chest. But I couldn't. Love wasn't enough. Not when it came with deception, with secrets, with the betrayal of our home and our family. I love her too, he added quietly, and it was like being punched in the stomach by someone who knew exactly how to hurt you. The next hour was a blur of accusations, explanations, half-truths, and confessions. I forced him to tell me everything, to recount every moment he had shared with her, every feeling he had hidden from me, every thought he had nurtured while I was sleeping next to him. He tried to justify it with words about longing, about missing someone from his past, about needing excitement, but it sounded hollow. All of it sounded hollow. The man I had known, the man I had trusted with my heart and our children, had become someone unrecognizable, someone capable of living a double life with such ease and such detachment that it made my blood run cold. By the end of the conversation, I felt exhausted, drained in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. My body felt heavy, as if the truth itself had pressed it down into the couch cushions. And yet, there was a strange clarity in that exhaustion. I knew, finally, that nothing would ever be the same. Trust had been shattered beyond repair. Our marriage, at least in the form I had believed in, was gone. And I had to decide, stay and try to rebuild in some fragile, tortured compromise, or leave and take back the life that had been stolen from me. That night, I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of the kids in their beds, and I made my decision. I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend that the man I loved and the man who had betrayed me were one and the same. I couldn't live under the same roof, pretending that life was normal, while knowing that every smile, every touch, every word could be a lie. I would leave. I would take the kids. I would reclaim my life, even if it meant starting over from scratch. The next morning, I began preparations quietly. I contacted a friend I trusted to watch the kids while I handled logistics, and I started gathering our essentials, making lists, arranging details I knew he would never anticipate. He noticed the subtle changes in my behavior, my quiet, deliberate distance, the way I moved through the house with purpose rather than idle routine, but he didn't understand.
He still thought there was time, that he could charm his way back into normalcy, that our life could continue as if nothing had happened. He was wrong. On the day I left, the house felt unbearably quiet. I loaded the car while the kids played outside, oblivious to the storm that had been brewing behind closed doors. He came out to say goodbye, and for a moment, I saw the man I had loved, the man who had held me, who had whispered promises, who had made me believe in us. But then I remembered the texts, the meetings, the lies, and that vision shattered. I held my head high, forced a calm smile, and told him that we were done. Not angry, not screaming, just done. The look in his eyes, a mixture of shock, regret, and something darker, something calculating, was almost worse than the betrayal itself. Driving away, the cityscape stretching out in front of me, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. I was leaving behind not just a man, but a life I had built, a home filled with memories and betrayal. But I was also moving towards something else, freedom, clarity, a chance to rebuild without the shadow of deception looming over me. The kids were in the back seat, singing along to a song on the radio, their laughter a fragile reminder that life went on, even after the world as I knew it had collapsed. In the weeks that followed, the emotions were a roller coaster. I would cry, rage, feel despair, and then find moments of peace, of clarity, of strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The kids needed me, and in taking care of them, I began to take care of myself. I started setting boundaries, reclaiming control over my life, asserting my space, my identity, my value. The house we shared was no longer a prison of secrets. It was a memory I carried with me, a reminder of what had been lost and what I had survived. And yet, the betrayal never left me completely. There were nights I would wake up with my chest tight, images of him and her flashing in my mind, the knowledge of their laughter, their intimacy, the stolen moments that were never mine. But over time, those memories became a lens, not a chain. They were proof of what I had endured, proof that I could survive heartbreak and betrayal and emerge stronger, more self-aware, more determined not to allow anyone to diminish my worth. I never reached out to her. I never sought confrontation.
I realized that the battle wasn't with her, it was with him, with the choices he made, with the life he had constructed around lies and secrecy. And by leaving, by reclaiming my autonomy, I had already won, in the most important sense. I was no longer complicit in a marriage defined by betrayal. I had taken my children, my life, and my dignity, and I was rebuilding from the ashes of a relationship that had once seemed unshakable, but had proven to be hollow at its core. Sometimes late at night, I think about the life I left behind, the man I loved, the years that were stolen, and I feel a pang of sorrow that is unavoidable, but also a deep, quiet strength. I survived what could have destroyed me. I rebuilt what could have been shattered beyond repair. And as the days stretch into weeks and the weeks into months, I realize that the hardest, most painful truths are also the ones that teach you who you truly are, who you can be, and what you are capable of surviving. And though the betrayal still echoes, though the pain still flares in sudden, sharp moments, I know that I am alive, whole, and finally free. The kids are laughing upstairs as I finish this cup of coffee, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe, truly breathe. The weight of his deceit no longer sits on my chest. I am the architect of my own life now, and for all the heartbreak, all the anger, all the despair, I am finally, undeniably in control.